So, how do we simplify perfect, square, and cube roots? So these are all perfect squares. If there is no visible root, then we know that we're taking a square root. If there is a different root, a cube root or a fourth root, then they will have to put that number right there in the radical. This is called the index. So a square root asks what number times itself equals positive 25? And the answer is 5. That's our principal root, the root that we consider here. If there is a negative on the outside of the radical, this negative will carry down. And the square root of 25 is 5. So negative square root of 25 is negative 5. However, if the radical if the negative is under the square root radical, there is no number times itself that will give us negative 25. So we must pull this out as I, the imaginary unit I. So now we really have the square root of 25 times I, which is 5I. If there is a variable underneath a radical, you can divide the exponent attached to that variable by the index. If it's a square root, then we have an index of 2. So the square root of 25 is 5, and then x to the second power, the square root of that, divide 2 by 2 to get x to the first. So again, what times itself equals 25x squared, and that's 5x times 5x. For 36x to the 8th, again, you take the square root of 36, which is 6, the square root of x to the 8th. We have our base of x, divide 8 by 2 to get 4. Another one like this. Here we have the square root of negative 49y to the 10th. We cannot take the square root of a negative, so that moves out as I. And then we can take the square root of 49, which is 7, the square root of y to the 10th, divide 10 by 2 to get y to the 5th, and then we have I out there. So that's our square roots, perfect square roots. You might also see cube roots. So a cube root, and again, you will see that index if it's not a square root. Here we ask what number times itself 3 times is 125. And the answer is 5. 5 times 5 is 25. 25 times 5 is 125. Now, unlike a square root, we can take the cube root of a negative, because a negative times itself 3 times remains negative. So here we have negative 6. 6 times 6 is 36. Times 6 again is 216. But if there is a negative on the outside, you must bring it down. And then we take the cube root of negative 343. We can take a cube root of a negative. A negative times itself 3 times is negative. And the cube root of 343 is 7. So if we have a negative parentheses negative 7, that becomes positive 7. And finally, taking the cube root of 729x cubed, if we have a variable with an exponent under the radical, we still divide this 3 by the index. So the cube root of 729 is 9. And then we take our variable x and divide 3 by 3 to get x to the first. So I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions.